Agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, it's the intention of the Labour opposition to support the referral of this bill to a select committee, and I say that in brackets, as long as we can get a referral motion that we agree with. I think members of the House know that this committee generally works on a pretty much bipartisan basis on technical legislation. We have our differences every now and again, and we do have a strong preference for not sitting during the sitting time of the House, and we arrange our business either in the recess or generally deal with things expeditiously, as we are with Sir Roger's bill at the moment. So certainly there's an offer to get it back by the 1st of November, certainly to support a motion to do that, but not to support a motion which requires sitting during the sitting time. This is a mixture of technical and political matters, Mr. Speaker. There are some things in here that we disagree with and we want to try and sort out at the Select Committee, but on balance there are some things, including in the private school area, where they are travelling in the right direction, and it would be petty of us not to support sending the bill off. I apologise to a certain extent for focusing on some of the things which we will seek clarification on or want to oppose. And one of the areas that we want to get sorted out is the limited attendance centres, and I think there are a couple of points that are pretty important. One is that where children are being kept within a gymnasium or within a shopping mall or similar type arrangement, there should be some line of sight from the public area to where the children are being kept. I think it's a dangerous situation to have children in a room away from their parents, away from where anyone else can see what is going on in the room, with someone who is supervising them, especially where that person is not qualified. So I think a lot of the centres are set up with line of sight, so with windows or other arrangements where the public are passing by, or in a gymnasium where they can actually be seen by the parents who are exercising at the gym. And if that is the case, then I think it's good. The other question I've got in that area, which I think does need to be sorted out, I think it's fair to say that I'm not quite as anxious about this area as some of my predecessors, as some of the people who are ministers in between myself and the current minister. But one thing that I think is absolutely vital, and that is anyone who is working in one of these centres has a police check. And that is the effect of the changes that she's made appears to be to remove the requirement for a police clearance for the person who is involved. Well, the Minister says it doesn't. I've read it and I think it does. We'll get that clarified at the Select Committee, and if it's not the intention, it's not intended. I'm pleased to hear it, and we can check that and correct it if it's a problem, and if it's not a problem, we won't need to do that. I think some of my colleagues are going to talk a little bit about the secondary tertiary area. I'm just going to say that I am someone for less legislation rather than more, and I've got the view that in this area the government has an ability to do what it wants to do without legislation, and if there is some legislation that's blocking it, we're actually better to take that out and do a more general power to approve programs or power to fund particular policies, rather than try and do it as appears to be done now in an area-by-area basis. I think the ability of the government to spend money in areas on which it has policy is one that should be pretty much untrammelled. We can argue about the policies. We can, in fact, I think in this we might be getting back closer to some of the work that the Labor government was doing before the election, and of course we can't criticise the minister for seeing the light. But the real question I've got, and I'll be interested. The trouble is when you clarify within the law, what you do is you keep on making it really hard to do innovative things and you run up against it. And I'll be interested in the contribution at the Select Committee of the Honourable Sir Roger Douglas as to whether he thinks this is necessary or whether a more general empowering provision is one which is appropriate. Another area that I would like to comment on, Mr. Speaker, is that of the enrolment legislation, because this is an area where I think there are two loopholes that are being opened up by this, and I want to say that Mr. Peachy and I have had discussions about enrolment legislation in the past. I think it's fair to say that we have different points of view. And I won't say that he, as a principal, was the worst rorter in the system, but I'd say that he was someone who every now and again used to push the limits and test the procedures and sometimes use some of the better ideas, some of the loopholes, some of the back alleys that some of his colleagues who were principals taught him. That's what happens when the legislation has loopholes. It tends to be exploited. I think this establishes a couple of loopholes. One is the right of the child of a member of a board of trustees to be enrolled, notwithstanding the location where they live. Now, I know this is sometimes a worst-case scenario, but when I think about these things, my default position is, how would John Morris deal with this? Well, and who the principal of Auckland Grammar, and I'm fair to say that I actually quite like John. I respect some of his views. I disagree with some of them. I think his students are missing the boat a bit through the overemphasis on foreign exams and their relatively poor performance in scholarship, and I think they could be doing better. But the point that I go back to is, how would John use this? And I know what he'd do. What he would do is he'd see a good boy in Form 2 he thought could be an important part of his first 15 going forward, and he'd second the kid's parent onto the Board of Trustees for a few weeks. Let the boy into the school, and then, of course, there'd be no requirement for the parent to be on the Board of Trustees. Well, that can happen. Co-options to boards of trustees can happen. I wonder, as we go forward, whether we would put some requirement that the person has to have been there for a number of years. Maybe that should be a requirement. But the thing that I get most interested in when I see the National Party tending back to their Tory British ways of inherited rights. Instead of inherited seats in the House of Lords, what they are promoting in this bill is the right to pass on to your children the right to go to a school, and your grandchildren through your children. The fact that a family might not have lived in zone for many generations, if this system is adopted, could well result in generation after generation of kid having the right to go to a school of their parents' choice over and above the rights of the kids who live in the neighbourhood. Clearly there is still a zone, but again we know what happens to zones when there is a favourable system. The Auckland Grammar Zone, I think it's fair to say, before the tight legislation was where the headmaster thought it was. That was effectively the way the zone was designed. And what will happen is that the zones will shrink in order to create more places for the inherited nobles or the good football players that people want to import into their schools. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that is an area that has to be sorted out. In summary, Mr. Speaker, we will support this bill, and if we can sort out the referral motion, we will support it going to the Select Committee as well.